The Trump administration recently announced a 28-point plan created in conjunction with Russian representatives who met with Trump administration folks in Miami back in October that offers a path towards peace and ending the war in Ukraine. Ukraine was not a participant in the initial discussions. However, Trump administration officials, including Jared Kushner, met with Ukrainian representatives a few days ago in Switzerland. Details of what sort of changes in that plan might emerge are not available at this time. I'm going to focus on the most problematic areas of the initial plan. There are some good things in the plan. That said, I don't know that this plan has a chance in hell. Let's get talking about it. The very first point in the plan emphasizes that Ukraine will remain a sovereign country. That's great. However, many of these points infringe upon that very sovereignty. Point 6 restricts the size of the Ukrainian armed forces to 600,000 total members. It is a violation of their sovereignty to force such a condition upon them. Point 7, Ukraine is supposed to add a constitutional amendment that the country will not join NATO, and furthermore, that NATO will then agree to pass a provision that prevents Ukraine from joining. First point, forcing Ukraine to create a constitutional amendment is a violation of their sovereignty. Next, if you're going to have NATO create an amendment within their bylaws stating that Ukraine will not be allowed to be a member, that requires agreement from all of the member nations of NATO. That's not going to happen. Point 8, NATO would not station troops in Ukraine. There are several provisions of this agreement that require verification and enforcement. How are you going to do that if you don't have troops on the ground? Somebody has to have stakes in the game other than Russia and Ukraine to provide a credible commitment mechanism. Point 21, Russia gets all of the territories that it controls right now, including Crimea, Donbass, all of those regions, plus the areas of the Donbass that Ukraine still holds. This is, again, one, a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. Second, it simply freezes the conflict in place and puts the Russians on the doorstep of being able to accomplish their ultimate goal to destroy Ukraine and absorb it back into Russia. Finally, the 25th point of the plan requires that Ukraine have elections within 100 days. I have detailed extensively the efforts of the Russians to infiltrate and subvert elections throughout Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And they've certainly done it before in Ukraine. Telling a sovereign country you must have elections within a period of time, it's a non-starter. What conditions might emerge from these recent US-Ukrainian talks in Switzerland? I would imagine that these 5 to 6 points that I discussed here are going to be the central objections that the Ukrainians have to such an agreement. The next part of it is, if any of those are changed, it is highly likely that Russia will reject this agreement. The Russians really have no interest unless they can get guarantees that basically set them up to be able to take over Ukraine in the future. This initial agreement does that. Any revised agreement is likely to strike at the heart of those things. Next up, the United States forcing some kind of agreement is almost laughable because they don't have the leverage that they would have had they been consistently supplying Ukraine with arms and support during the Trump administration. The money that went to support those operations is gone. What's happening now is that we sell limited stocks of weapons to the Europeans who then give them to Ukraine. Intelligence sharing by the United States, which had been very consistent since 2014, dropped off precipitously over the last 10 months, and it's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians trust what they might get anyway. European countries, on the other hand, have stepped into that breach by supplying weapons and other forms of economic support to Ukraine, and filling some of the gaps in that intelligence gathering situation. In a larger strategic sense, this agreement offers yet another sign that the United States is stepping further and further away from its European allies and from NATO in general. All of these things swirl around this central problem of creating an agreement to end the war in Ukraine. I don't really have a whole lot of hope that this is going to produce much of anything. I believe the war will continue for the foreseeable future. It's also worth noting that regarding the initial plan, Russian press coverage, bloggers, and in their newspapers absolutely greeted this plan with glee, saying that it gave them everything they wanted. However, like me, most of these voices were highly skeptical that these provisions would stay in once Ukraine got a look at it. If you have any context you'd like to share on this, please do so. I don't know everything, and we could certainly learn more together. I look forward to talking to you again very soon. Thank you.